we're going to talk about is the extrinsic laryngeal muscles. The extrinsic laryngeal muscles, as I said, determine the position of the larynx in the neck, whether it's high up in the neck or low down in the neck. Okay. The extrinsic laryngeal muscles can be divided into two groups. They can be divided as laryngeal elevators or suprahyoids and laryngeal depressors or infrahyoids. Okay, right there. The laryngeal elevators elevate the larynx, meaning they lift the larynx high up in the neck, specifically involved during swallowing. Some of the muscles I've listed there are digastricus, stylohyoid, geniohyoid, and the mylohyoid. And I'm not going to go into details of that. But all I want you to know is laryngeal elevators are muscles that elevate the larynx, and they're situated above the hyoid, suprahyoid, meaning they have one point of attachment to the hyoid and the other point of attachment outside the hyoid above. Laryngeal depressors are also called infrahyoids, or it depresses the larynx, meaning it decreases or lowers the larynx in the neck. Some of the examples are omohyoid, sternohyoid, sternothyroid, and thyrohyoid. These are muscles that have one point of attachment to the hyoid and the other point of attachment to structures below the hyoid, and that is why they're called infrahyoid. Okay, suprahyoids, infrahyoids, laryngeal elevators, and laryngeal depressors. Okay, so that is an example. This is the hyoid, so the muscles above the hyoid, mylohyoid, stylohyoid, digastricus, these are elevators. The depressors are the thyrohyoid, the sternothyroid, the omohyoid, and the sternohyoid, which have connection to the hyoid and to structures below the hyoid. Okay, those are extrinsic laryngeal muscles. Now this is an overview of how do you look at the vocal folds. I've been talking to you about the vocal folds so far. This is the vocal fold, a pearly white structure that has point of attachment to the inner side of the thyroid notch, and the posterior aspect of the vocal folds are attached to the vocal process of the arytenoid cartilage. Okay, this is the position of the vocal folds when you're breathing quietly. Look at the opening of the vocal fold. It has about 8 millimeter width. So let me back up here and say the opening that you see between the vocal folds is called the glottis. Glottis, glottis. Okay? The width between the glottis is going to be 8 millimeters during quiet respiration. This is the position of the glottis when you are under vigorous respiration, meaning when you're trying to do a physical activity and exerting yourself, your vocal folds have to be widely open to take in a lot more air. It's about twice the glottal width as quiet respiration. This position that you see here is the phonatory position of the vocal folds, and they're completely adductor, meaning the vocal folds have to come together for phonatory position when you have to phonate. This is the whisper position where your vocal folds are adducted, but you still see a gap between the glottis and your vocal folds are not vibrating here, and that's the whisper position of your vocal folds. This is the view of the vocal folds when you're seeing through an indirect laryngoscopy. If you've gone to the dentist's office and the dentist uses a mirror to see the back of your mouth or the tooth, kind of when he can see just by opening your mouth and he has to use a mirror, the same kind of mirror but bent with an angle at 45 degrees is placed at the back of your mouth to be able to view the vocal folds. Okay, this is called an indirect laryngoscopy. All right, and those are the positions of the vocal folds. Okay. All right. Now, having talked about the structures in our phonatory system, how do these structures and how does the phonatory system help us in speech? Remember we talked about the adduction or bringing the vocal folds together and abduction, taking the vocal folds apart. Some speech sounds can be categorized into voiceless speech sounds and voiced speech sounds. Voiceless speech sounds are speech sounds that does not require your vocal folds to come together. And voiced speech sounds are speech sounds that needs your vocal folds to come together. So if you try these sounds with me as I'm doing this lecture or as you're listening to this lecture, I want you to go and then I want you to go zzz. When you do both these sounds, I want you to place your hand in your neck and I want you to feel the difference in your neck when you produce these two sounds. Or you can go ha, ah. When you produce voice speed sounds like the z or the ah, which all vowels are voice speed sounds, you should be able to feel a vibration in your neck. That's because of the vibration of the vocal fold. When you produce voiceless speed sounds, there is no vibration of the vocal folds. Okay. Also, any changes that we have with pitch changes when I have an inflection or when I go any pitch changes that I have is because of the increased and decreased tension of the vocal folds. So in our speech, how does this phonatory system affect? It helps us in producing different speed sounds. The speed sounds could be voiced or voiceless speed sounds. And how we change our pitch and vary our intonational speaking patterns is because of our vocal fold movements. Okay. Now, we talked about the vocal folds needing to vibrate, and the source for the vibration is going to come from our lungs, right? So lungs have to produce this air, and the air has to come and build below this vocal folds, and it creates something called the subglottic pressure. The subglottic pressure is nothing but the air pressure that is built up under or below the vocal folds, okay? Now, if I were to bring my vocal folds together, there should be some force to set these vocal folds apart or to blow these vocal folds apart. That force is going to be the subglottic pressure that builds below the vocal folds or under the vocal folds. Now, the subglottic pressure has to increase above the pressure, to be more than the pressure above the vocal folds. When that happens, it forces the vocal folds to open. Now, when I say it forces the vocal folds to open, it's not like it goes and it's a one-shot open. It's a nice, smooth movement of the vocal folds from the posterior aspect to the anterior aspect. So the vocal folds are blown apart from the posterior aspect to the anterior aspect in a nice wave-like motion. Okay. So, when those open apart, now what happens to that pressure? The pressure is going between the vocal folds is airflow, right? When now the air passes between the vocal folds and it goes above the vocal folds, what happens to the pressure in between the vocal folds? The pressure in between the vocal folds drop, right? When the pressure in between the vocal folds drop, your vocal folds are going to get sucked again to midline, okay? Then again the vocal folds are closed. Subglottic pressure builds below the vocal folds. When the subglottic pressure below the vocal folds increases above the vocal folds, it blows open the vocal folds. When the vocal folds open apart, this pressure flows as airflow between the vocal folds. When the airflow between the vocal folds rises up and goes above the vocal folds, there is negative pressure between the vocal folds and it sucks the vocal fold again. All right. That phenomenon of sucking the vocal folds together due to negative pressure is called the Bernoulli effect. Okay, I think I might have that right here. There you go. Bernoulli effect. Bernoulli effect is when the air passes through the vocal fold and it passes beyond and goes above the vocal fold. There is negative pressure between the vocal folds. The negative pressure between the vocal folds causes the vocal folds to be sucked together, and it's aided by elastic properties of the vocal folds as well. Elastic properties meaning the ability of the body to come back to its original position. Okay. Now, when we talked about subglottic pressure, I want you to understand certain subglottic pressures involved in speech. In order for somebody to initiate phonation, meaning I need to bring my vocal folds together and to start phonation, I need an approximate subglottic pressure of about 3 centimeters of water. When I mean 3 centimeters of water, I'm not saying that there is a buildup of water below your vocal folds. All I'm saying is the air molecules that build up as pressure is measured in centimeters of water, meaning your pressure is measured or depicted in centimeters of water. Okay. In order to sustain phonation, meaning if I have to go p, that is when I sustain phonation, I need about 5 to 7 centimeters of water. In order to produce a loud speech, in order to say something really loud, hey, I need to build a subglottic pressure of about 10 centimeters of water to be able to produce that loud speech. Now for shouting, which I'm not going to depict what shouting is, if you're in a ball game or if you're cheering somebody, the subglottic pressure for shouting is about 20 centimeters of water. As you can see, how the increase, there is a need to increase your subglottic pressure as the need to initiate or sustain or produce different various phonations, your subglottic pressure is changing. Okay. All right, I need you to keep this slide in mind because I will be asking you this question: what is the minimum subglottic pressure required to initiate phonation? Or what is the minimum subglottic pressure required to sustain phonation? These are things that I really need you to know. Okay. Finally, what I want to talk about is the theory of phonation. It's called the myoelastic theory of phonation. This is exactly what we talked about so far, but I'm putting it in sum as under the theory of phonation. In order to phonate, we need airflow and pressure, which is where we get the airflow from the lungs. That airflow builds below the vocal folds as a subglottic pressure. Once the subglottic pressure increases and is more than a subglottic pressure above the vocal folds, it drives the vocal folds apart. And then when it drives the vocal folds apart, this elastic component of muscle and soft tissues and the Bernoulli effect will suck the vocal folds together, leading to the cycle of vibration that continues until you decide to stop phonation. Okay. The last thing that we're going to talk about here is certain properties that are associated, or certain parameters that are associated with phonation. One thing that I want to talk about is the frequency of phonation. How does somebody know it's a male voice versus a female voice? That is because there is a change in the frequency of phonation or frequency of vibration of the vocal folds. For males, the frequency of vibration is lower, resulting in a lower pitch when compared to females. So if I go you see how the frequency changed from a low or pitch, when I say pitch because that's what you're perceiving, a low pitch, to a high pitch. There was a change in frequency, which is what we can measure. Now this frequency depends on elasticity, tension, mass of the vocal fold. Okay, so if you look at this formula right here, frequency is proportional to the tension and length of the vocal fold and inversely proportional, reciprocal to the mass of the vocal fold. Now think about this. If I am trying to remember the cricothyroid muscle that we talked about, the CT muscle, what does the CT muscle do? It stretches the vocal fold. When it stretches the vocal fold, it increases the elasticity of the vocal fold. When it increases elasticity of the vocal fold, the mass per unit area of your vocal fold is decreasing. All of this results in an increased pitch. Okay, the frequency is directly proportional to the tension and length of the vocal fold. As the length of the vocal fold increases, the tension and stiffness of the vocal fold increases, while mass per unit area decreases. When it decreases, you have an increased pitch. So if I go ah, that results in an increase in my vocal fold length, increase in tension of my vocal fold, decrease in mass of my vocal fold, resulting in increased pitch. Okay. What I'm going to probably do is I will post a link, a YouTube link that shows different pitch variations, and you can see how the vocal fold is changing in length and tension when you observe those pitch changes as well. I will post that quick link as a quick link on your YouTube. Okay, so that sums up our phonatory system. So we talked about the respiratory system, we talked about the phonatory system. You've got your anatomy and different muscles and physiology of the articulatory system from Mrs. Basham's lecture. Then I will talk in part 3 the central nervous system and how it serves as a controller in the final output, the speech.